Story number 1.
The Midnight Train. It was a cold, biting autumn evening when 5 friends, Emma, Jack, Lily, Ben, and Sarah, decided to celebrate their hard-earned freedom after the grueling exams. They had heard about an old, forgotten railway station just outside town, and with a thrill for the unusual, they decided to embark on a midnight train ride. It was supposed to be a night of fun and adventure, a final hurrah before they all went their separate ways for the holidays. The station, when they arrived, was eerier than they had imagined. The air was thick with fog, swirling in ghostly patterns, making the old, crumbling station appear as if it were dissolving into the night. The platform was deserted, the only sound being the distant hoot of an owl and the occasional creak of old wood settling. There were no signs, no timetables, just the oppressive weight of the silent night. As they waited, a sense of unease began to settle over the group. The temperature seemed to drop with every passing minute, and the fog grew denser, pressing in on them like a living thing. Just as they began to question whether they should turn back, a distant rumble broke the silence. The fog parted as an ancient train emerged from the darkness, its rusted exterior and dimly lit windows giving it an almost spectral appearance. The friends exchanged nervous glances, but their excitement pushed them forward. They boarded quickly, eager to escape the cold. The inside of the train was just as decrepit as the outside. Dust-covered seats, flickering lights, and a pervasive musty odor that hinted at decades of neglect. They found an empty cabin at the back of the train, its door creaking ominously as they slid it open. Settling into the threadbare seats, they tried to shake off their growing unease. As the train pulled away from the station, the rhythmic clattering of the tracks did little to calm their nerves. The lights in the cabin flickered weakly, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. Outside, the world was an impenetrable wall of darkness, the landscape swallowed by the night. The train seemed to move at an impossibly slow pace, yet the scenery outside remained unchanged. An endless void of black. Time passed, though how much, none of them could tell. Their phones had no signal and the time display seemed frozen. The usual chatter and laughter faded, replaced by a heavy silence, each friend lost in their own thoughts. A cold draft seeped into the cabin, causing them to shiver, but when they looked around, the windows were shut tight and no one had opened the door. That was when the first echo of a whisper reached Emma's ears. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like a breath against her ear. She turned sharply, expecting to see one of her friends playing a prank, but they were all seated, their expressions mirroring her own confusion and unease. "Did anyone hear that?" she asked, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. "Hear what?" Jack replied, though there was a tremor in his voice. "A whisper. Like someone was right behind me," Emma whispered back, her eyes darting around the cabin. No one responded, but the tension in the air was palpable. Then the train gave a sudden, violent lurch, throwing them against the seats. The lights went out completely, plunging them into darkness so complete it was as if the night itself had swallowed them whole. In the pitch, black cabin, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. An unintelligible chorus of voices overlapping, echoing, and growing more insistent. Panic set in. They scrambled for their phones, their flashlights piercing the darkness just enough to reveal each other's terrified faces. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once, a disembodied cacophony that grew louder with each passing second. "Get out! We need to get out!" Sarah screamed, her voice rising above the din. She rushed to the door, but it was stuck. No, it was sealed, as if it had never been meant to open again. Ben and Jack joined her, pulling and banging on it with all their strength, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers turned to mocking laughter, the sound chilling them to their cores. Lily began to cry, her sobs barely audible over the rising chorus of ghostly voices. What is this? What's happening to us? Emma, trying to keep calm, moved toward the windows, hoping to shatter one and escape. But as she neared them, she recoiled in horror. The darkness outside was no longer empty. Pressed against the glass were faces. Pale, twisted faces with hollow eyes and mouths that gaped open in silent screams. The windows were covered in frost, but the faces pressed closer, as if trying to force their way inside. "They're outside! Oh God, they're trying to get in," Emma shouted, stumbling back into the others. The train's pace increased, the rhythmic clatter of the tracks turning into a deafening roar. The cabin shook violently as the laughter grew more malevolent, the voices now clear and vicious. "Welcome. Welcome to your final journey," one voice hissed. "You will never leave." Suddenly, the train gave another violent jolt, and the doors to the cabin burst open. But instead of the narrow corridor they expected, there was only darkness, a void that seemed to pulse with life. A cold wind swept into the cabin, carrying with it the stench of decay and something far worse. Fear, so intense it almost had a taste. The darkness outside the cabin wasn't empty anymore. Shapes moved within it, indistinct but clearly inhuman, their forms twisting and shifting as if they were made of the shadows themselves. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, each word a blade of fear slicing through their minds. Ben, in a blind panic, bolted for the open door, determined to escape the nightmare. But as soon as he crossed the threshold, he was swallowed by the darkness, his scream cut short as the void closed in around him. The others watched in horror as he vanished, his voice echoing faintly before being silenced forever. "We have to stick together," Jack yelled, grabbing hold of the remaining friends. But it was too late. The darkness surged forward, wrapping around them like tendrils, pulling them into the void one by one. Their screams echoed through the cabin, mingling with the laughter and whispers until, at last, there was only silence. The train stopped abruptly, the sudden stillness almost as jarring as the chaos that had preceded it. The cabin, once filled with the sounds of terror, was now empty. The doors swung open, revealing the forest outside, bathed in a pale, sickly light that filtered through the dense fog. The belongings of the friends were scattered across the seats, as if they had been ripped away from them in haste. But of the 5 friends, there was no sign. The train, now abandoned, slowly disappeared into the fog, leaving the forest silent once more. Local legends say that on certain nights, especially when the fog is thick and the air is cold, you can still hear the distant sound of a train whistle echoing through the forest. Those who have dared to investigate report seeing shadowy figures moving through the trees, always just out of sight. And sometimes, if you're close enough, you might hear the faint whispers, voices of the lost, pleading, crying out in despair, forever trapped in the darkness. The midnight train is rarely seen, but when it is, it's always at the edge of town, where the tracks lead into the woods. Those who board it are never seen again. The train's true destination remains a mystery, but it is said that the spirits of those who vanish on it are doomed to wander, searching for new passengers to join them on their eternal journey. And so, the story continues, passed down as a warning. If you ever find yourself at an old, forgotten station and you hear the whistle of a train in the distance, turn back, because once you board, there is no getting off. The friends who once sought adventure now haunt the train, their souls forever bound to its endless, nightmarish journey. They are no longer the people they once were, twisted by the darkness, and they wait, in the shadows, for the next unsuspecting group to join them. For the midnight train never stops searching for souls to claim.
Story number 2.
Untitled. The Last Train. Tia loved taking the late-night train from the city back to her small suburban home. The rhythmic clattering of the wheels on the track lulled her into a peaceful daze, and the sparse number of passengers allowed her a quiet ride to decompress from her long days working in the bustling city. But on this particular night, the tranquility she so cherished was about to be shattered. As the train left the bright lights of the city behind, Tia settled into her usual window seat in the last car. She noticed a man sitting across the aisle, dressed in an old-fashioned suit that seemed out of place. His face was obscured by the brim of a hat, and he was eerily still, staring out into the darkness. Tia shrugged off the oddity, thinking he was just another tired commuter. But as the train plunged into the countryside, she felt his gaze shift from the window to her. Whenever she glanced over, he was still looking outside, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The train entered a long, dark tunnel, and the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the carriage. A chill ran down Tia's spine, and she heard faint whispers echoing in the confined space. The whispers grew louder, and Tia strained to make out the words, her heart pounding in her chest. The words were garbled at first, but soon she could make out a chilling message. "Jade, off the train. Tia, get off now." She looked around to see if anyone else heard the whispers, but the few passengers were either asleep or oblivious. The man across the aisle was now looking directly at her, his eyes glinting in the dim light. As the train emerged from the tunnel, the whispers ceased, but Tia's unease grew. The man was gone, and in his place lay an old, leather-bound diary. Curiosity mixed with dread compelled her to pick it up. The pages were filled with frantic scrawls and disturbing sketches, all centered around a recurring theme: a woman trapped on a train with no escape. Each page seemed to mirror Tia's own experiences, and as she flipped through, she felt a growing terror that the diary was foretelling her fate. She tried to convince herself it was a cruel prank, but deep down, she felt an inexplicable connection to the words. The train slowed to a stop at an unfamiliar station shrouded in mist. The lights flickered again, and Tia could barely make out the name: the Station of Shadows. A sense of doom filled her as she watched ghostly figures board the train. They were ethereal, almost transparent, and each took a seat, leaving one empty across from Tia. The man reappeared, sitting in the vacant spot. He smiled, a sinister grin that revealed sharp, glistening teeth. "It's time, Tia," he whispered, his voice echoing with a chilling finality. "You know what you must do." Terrified, Tia ran to the door, frantically pushing the emergency release. The train began to move, the spectral passengers watching her with vacant eyes. She stumbled into the cold night air as the train gathered speed, the man's laughter echoing behind her. The world around her blurred as she raced down the platform, her mind reeling from the horror she had just escaped. She reached the edge, her heart pounding in her ears, drowning out all reason. In that moment of desperation, she sought escape from the nightmare that had become her reality. Without thinking, she leaped. Tia's tragic end left more questions than answers. The authorities discovered the diary on the train, but no trace of the mysterious man or the ghostly passengers. To this day, her story is whispered among the late-night commuters who wonder what lurks in the shadows of the last train home. Some say if you listen closely on a quiet night, you can still hear Tia's cries echoing through the tunnels. Her story is a chilling reminder that some journeys are better left unfinished, and that sometimes the greatest horrors are the ones we cannot see.
Story number 3.
The Last Train. Bella stood alone on the platform, her breath fogging in the crisp autumn air. The night was darker than usual, with thick clouds blotting out the moon and stars, leaving the world in an unsettling void. The train station was deserted, the usual bustle of commuters long gone. She checked her watch again. 10:45 p.m. The train should have arrived by now. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant rustling of leaves in the wind. Bella wrapped her coat tighter around her, glancing nervously down the tracks. Something felt off, but she couldn't place it. The information board overhead flickered weakly, displaying an old schedule, but there was no mention of any delays or cancellations. She was eager to get home after a long day and hadn't received any alerts about the train being late. She waited for what felt like an eternity. The cold began to creep into her bones, and she cursed herself for not bringing a warmer jacket. Just as she considered calling a cab, a faint rumble in the distance caught her attention. She peered down the tracks and saw the faint glow of headlights piercing through the darkness. Relief washed over her. The train was finally arriving. As the train drew closer, something about it seemed off. The engine looked older, much older than the usual trains she took, its exterior dark and battered, with paint peeling and windows thick with grime. The train's whistle let out a low, mournful wail that sent a shiver down her spine. But Bella was too tired to care. She just wanted to get home. The train screeched to a halt in front of her, the brakes emitting an ear-piercing shriek that echoed through the empty station. The doors slid open with a creak, revealing the dimly lit interior. Bella hesitated for a moment, peering inside. The lights flickered erratically, casting long, sinister shadows. The seats, she noticed, were filled with passengers, all slumped in their places, heads bowed as if they were asleep or deep in thought. A strange unease gnawed at her, but she shook it off. "It's just an old train," she muttered to herself, stepping inside. The door closed behind her with a loud bang, and the train lurched forward, catching her off balance. As she moved down the narrow aisle, Bella couldn't help but notice that the passengers weren't moving at all. No one acknowledged her presence. The entire carriage was filled with an unnatural stillness, a silence that seemed to press in on her from all sides. She looked closer and felt her heart skip a beat. The passengers weren't just still. They were eerily lifeless. Their skin was pallid, almost gray, and their eyes were open but dull, staring blankly ahead. Some looked as though they hadn't moved in years, their clothes outdated and tattered, covered in a fine layer of dust. Bella's throat tightened with fear. She wanted to turn around, to get off the train, but it was already moving too fast, the world outside a blur of blackness. She tried to convince herself that they were just very tired people, perhaps commuters who had fallen asleep on their way home. But deep down, she knew something was terribly wrong. She found an empty seat near the back and sat down, her heart pounding. The seat was cold and damp, as if it hadn't been used in ages. She glanced around, searching for a conductor or another passenger who seemed alive, but there was no one. Only those unmoving, lifeless figures. The train sped through the night, hurtling forward at an alarming speed. Outside the windows, there was nothing, just an endless void of darkness that seemed to swallow the train whole. The lights flickered more violently now, casting grotesque, shifting shadows that danced across the walls and the faces of the dead passengers. Bella tried to pull out her phone, desperate to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal. The screen glowed weakly before going black. The battery suddenly drained. Panic surged through her. She was trapped, and there was no way to contact the outside world. Then she heard it, the faint sound of something moving behind her. It was a slow, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Bella froze, her breath hitching in her throat. The sound grew closer, more deliberate, echoing through the empty carriage. She forced herself to turn around, her body trembling with fear. At first, she saw nothing, just the long, dark aisle stretching into the distance. But then, at the far end of the carriage, she saw a figure. It was one of the passengers, but now it was moving, dragging itself along the floor toward her, its limbs twisted and contorted at unnatural angles. Its face was a ghastly mask of decay, eyes hollow and mouth hanging open in a silent scream. The closer it came, the stronger the smell of rot and decay, filling the air with a stench that made Bella gag. She bolted from her seat, running toward the front of the train, desperate to find an escape. But as she passed through each carriage, she realized with mounting horror that all the passengers were now moving. Slowly, deliberately, their dead eyes locking onto her as she passed. Some began to rise from their seats, their movements jerky and unnatural, as if they hadn't used their limbs in decades. Bella's mind raced. This wasn't just an old, abandoned train. This was something far worse, something beyond her understanding. She had boarded a train that shouldn't exist, a train that carried the souls of the damned. She reached the front carriage, hoping against hope that the conductor could help her. But when she threw open the door to the conductor's cabin, she was met with only more horror. The cabin was empty except for a single withered corpse slumped over the controls, its hands frozen in a death grip on the levers. The train was running itself. Bella's last shred of hope crumbled. She was trapped on a ghost train surrounded by the dead, with no way to escape. The train's speed continued to increase, the rattling of the carriages growing louder and more violent, as if the entire vehicle was on the verge of shaking itself apart. In a last, desperate attempt, Bella tried to pry open a door, to jump off the train and into the night. But the doors wouldn't budge. The windows were sealed shut, the glass too thick to break. She was a prisoner, hurtling toward some unknown, terrifying destination. The dead passengers were closing in now, their movements quicker, more frenzied. They reached out to her, their cold, skeletal hands grasping at her clothes, pulling her down. Bella screamed, struggling against them, but there were too many. They dragged her to the floor, their faces inches from hers, their breath cold and foul. As their hands closed around her throat, Bella's vision began to blur. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was the face of a young girl, no older than 10, staring down at her with dead, empty eyes. The next morning, the train station was quiet, the fog lifting as the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds. The regular train, the one Bella had been waiting for, was back on schedule, but there was no sign of Bella, and no one reported seeing her after that night. Weeks later, a conductor at a nearby station reported something strange. He claimed to have seen an old, rusted train speeding through the countryside late at night, its carriages filled with passengers who didn't move, didn't speak, and didn't seem. He saw Bella, too, standing at the window of the last carriage, her eyes hollow and her face pale, staring out into the night with a look of endless sorrow. The story spread, becoming a local legend. They say that if you're waiting alone at that station late at night and you see an old train approach, you should never board it. For once you do, there's no coming back. Bella, like the passengers before her, was now part of the train's eternal journey, a journey with no end, on a train that travels through the realms of the dead, forever searching for the living to join its ranks.
Thank you for watching our video. For more creepy stories, stay tuned to our channel. Like, subscribe, and share. See you next time. Till then, take care.